This Chalitza as Yomi of Yevamos is coming to the end, or we are coming to the end of Yomi of Yevamos. Tomorrow night's the Siyam, and we zoiche tonight to have this live demonstration by Yedidi, Harh, and Rabbi Shpitzer, Shlita. On the 15th day of Chodesh Adar, Tovshim Pei Beis, Klal Yisrael fell into deep mourning over the Petira of Sarah Torah, Morenu Reb Chaim Kanievsky. And many stories surfaced after his Petira, and their publications had a lot to write, and Maspidim had a lot to say. One of the most popular stories and the most amazing stories about Reb Chaim was the one about the Chagov. The Reb Chaim was writing a sefer called Karnei Chagovim, something got to do with the simonim on grasshoppers, and he was sitting in his house in Rechav Rashbam, and he wanted to understand the intricacies, the details, how a Chagov looks. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, on his windowsill came a green Chagov. And he went and he analyzed that Chagov, and then he knew exactly what's the simonim of the Chagov. And then the Chagov flew away. And then he was sitting back on his chair, and he had Agmas Nefesh. He says, "Oy, I should have looked about another detail." A few minutes later, the Chagov came back onto his windowsill again. And Reb Chaim analyzed it, and he realized what is the real Chagov, what's the not Chagov. And they told this to Rabbi Yashiv. Rabbi Yashiv says, such a thing we find by the Rishonim. And Rabbi Yashiv quoted the Shoavei Mayim in Perik Aleph Machalas Asuros Oismem, that they talk about a certain bird, a kavod, and they said, when the Ri, Balatoisus, was learning the sugyos of Oifos, ba kavod echad al yeshivasoi umetzu kukavan niklef. All of a sudden, lo and behold, out of nowhere, in flew this bird, and the Ri Balatoisus found this bird. There's a story heard recently, Reb Cheskel Abramsky, Tzadik Nevroch in 1951, I think it was, when he went from London to Eretz Yisrael. He was on the boat, on the deck, and he was learning. And he was into being mafarish the Toseftas, and he was sitting on the deck, and he had a very hard Tosefta. He couldn't make heads or tails out of this Tosefta. And he was sitting there, and the wind began to blow, and he had a shas of one volume. If many are familiar with these shas, and we remember there was the whole shas of one volume, and he was sitting learning, and the wind came and blew the pages back and forth, back and forth. When the wind subsided, he saw the page it was on, he read it, and he found the answer on that page to the question that he was looking for. Shlita. And this is something that people that learn Torah Lishma are zoiche to. You get a Chagov, you get a bird, it turns to the right page. I think we can say B'zei Rampin, as we had a long learning of Yomi of Yevamos. Many weeks and months went by, and we got Harh of Yomi of Yevamos, kol echad from darga delay. And here we are, the last night of Yomi of Yevamos, and we want to get clarity. So we had flying in from Eretz Yisrael. Harh, Rabbi Shpitzer came in to give us a little understanding, to see it in front of our eyes. We should analyze the sugyos to understand the sugyos. I think this is something beautiful, and it's Chaste Hashem Yisborach that we managed to come together to be zoiche to the extra clarity in this sugya of Chalitza. With that, it's my great kavod and honor to call Rabbi Shpitzer to deliver their demonstration of Hilchas Chalitza.
We start with the Yishkoyach to all those many people who've been involved in making this evening happen, to the local Askonim, to the Yomi Commission of Agudas Yisrael, and this wonderful shul, Shoavei Mayim, and your incredible Rav, Hagoyin Reb Yoir Shlita, Yedid Neurai, Hagoyin Reb Yoir, who already in his Bochrisha days was outstanding in Asmoda and in clarity. And what should I say? England would have been very lucky and would have loved to have kept Rabbi Adler in England, but our loss is your gain. Toronto was Zoicha to a wonderful Rav and an incredible koiches, very amazing talents of Yedidi Hagoyin Reb Yoir Shlita. On a personal note, allow me to just say that I'm born in Gateshead in England. The yeshiva in Gateshead started many years ago. And what did they have there? 14, 20 people, didn't have any money at all, and they set up what was very famously known as the Alta Blechana Shul, which was basically a piece of tin, and they davened in there. And exactly 100 years ago, they got a visit, 1923, the chief rabbi. Chief rabbi of England hasn't always been the biggest Talmid Chacham of note, but represented the general populace, and visited Gateshead, and he sees a blech and a shul, a pasnish, and he was well connected, and he offered that he would raise the money and build them a shul worthy of the name in Gateshead. And wasn't a major vote in town because it was altogether something like up to 20 people in town, and everybody was very happy. You get money, you don't need to do anything at all, and we'll get a shul. The chief rabbi is prepared to give us a shul. And there was one Yid in town who didn't agree. And he said, if we take money from the chief rabbi, then who knows what message we're giving to our children, our Einiklach, that his form of Yiddishkeit, that sort of watered down sort of Yiddishkeit, might be somewhat acceptable if we're prepared to take money and what he gives us for our shul. And I'm worried what's going to happen with our Einiklach. Who knows whether our Einiklach will be from an Allah if we're prepared to take this money. And he insisted and refused to take the money from the chief rabbi of England. And that Yid, wherever Rabbi Shpitzer, was called Rabbi Adler, who with great Mesiras Nefesh died for the future of Anglo Jewry and for the future of his own Einiklach. Lo lechinam Meir Rabbi Shpitzer that you're zeicha here to have Hagoyin Rabbi Adler with all his amazing talents and abilities and capabilities. Das kommt von der Elter Zeder, was hat verstanden that we have to be Mesiras Nefesh and give a clear message to our children what sort of Yiddishkeit is available. I had the zchus just now to hear the Geschmackkeit and the clarity of the Daf Yomi shiur of Rabbi Adler, and allow me just to add one little thing. In 1931, the same Rabbi Adler made a chasna of one of his daughters. I met just this week a Yid from Alta Gateshead who remembered Rabbi Adler. 1931, he made a chasna. He sent out chasna invitations, and it was accepted in those days, in England, that you sent a telegram to the chasna. It cost money, but people showed their participation by sending a telegram. On his chasna invitation, 1931, he sent out invitations, and printed on the invitation was written, please don't respond with a telegram. Any money you would have given to pay for the telegram, I have a Yid called Rabbi Shapiro who's setting up a yeshiva, Chachmi Lublin in Lublin. Send the money to Rabbi Shapiro. What he's doing is a valuable thing. Lo lechinam Rabbi Shpitzer, that Rabbi Adler's Einikel sits here, Beruma Shaloilam, and get a shiur with a tremendous clarity. This is, besides his own hard work, Roisas Chosovas. Where Rabbi Shpitzer? Mitzvah's Chalitza dates back a long time. We're all familiar with the story that Avraham Avinu got involved in the Milchama of the 4 and the 5 kings and won the war, saved the Melech Sodom. And Melech Sodom turns around to Avraham Avinu and he says to him, Ten li nefesh for chush kachloch. You can take all the money. Avraham Avinu had his reasons why he didn't want to take the money. And evidently, in Shemayim they held he was right. He shouldn't take the money. Avraham Avinu expressed himself to the Melech Sodom and he said, I don't want anything from your money. Im michut va'ad tzroich nal. I don't want to take from you not a string and not a tzroich nal, not a shoelace. Says the Medrash in Breishis, in the Zchus, that Avraham Avinu said, michut va'ad tzroich nal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael a mitzvah with a tzroich nal. the mitzvah of Chalitza. This mitzvah of Chalitza is so great that, unfortunately, sometimes may never be necessary. May there never be a case of Chalitza. But sometimes a man dies and he leaves behind a wife and a brother, but the brother is a little kid. Brother might be 2 years old, can't do Chalitza 2 years old, and she has to wait until the brother becomes of age that he's able to do Chalitza. And evidently from the Mishpatei Hashem that it's worthwhile and it's kedai waiting so many years in order to be able to do a Chalitza. If we have the time, Be'ez Hashem, we'll see a little bit of what's explained in the Zohar Kodesh and the Rishonim, the depths of the mitzvah of Chalitza. Right now, we want to see a little bit the shoe which is used for Chalitza. We daven, we hope for the day when Chalitza will never be relevant. We daven that Chalitza should be a mitzvah which is learned, I'm involved somewhat in the field of infertility, and halavai, we should be zoicha that Chalitza should be a relic of the past. Unfortunately, it isn't yet. I brought with from Yerushalayim a Chalitza shoe, which sadly is still in use. It's been used recently for the Chalitza for one of those Nebuch who was trampled on in Meron last year, and his wife did Chalitza this year with this shoe. We'll try first to examine and see the details of the shoe and then see what's involved in the actual Maisa Chalitza as it's written in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. The Chalitza shoe is described in great detail in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah makes the point that Chalitza has to be done with a shoe, exactly the same shoe that the Torah was talking about. There might be 1,000 different sorts of shoes in the world, but none of them are good for Chalitza. Chalitza has to be done with a shoe the way it was in the times when the Torah was given. Baruch Hu said to Avraham Avinu, he's talking about a particular shoe. And with that sort of shoe, we have to do Chalitza. And the Ramah says, and Chasam Sofer paraphrases this, it doesn't make a difference that modes change and trends change. Chalitza shoe can never change. And that's something that's borne out in actuality in the world. Klal Yisrael has lived in every corner in the world, far-flung areas around the world. And for hundreds of years, maybe 1,000 years more, there was no contact between one killer and the next, even living in Morocco and Syria and Germany and Poland and all the way around the world. And there was no contact. They spoke different languages and they ate different foods and they were different minhagim. When we meet up after 1,000 years and we bring people from Morocco and people from Germany and they eat different food and everything is different, completely different concept and different mentality. But one thing is the same. The Chalitza shoe is exactly the same shoe because it's been copied and copied and copied again, exactly the way it was in the times of the Gemara. I don't know what clothing Avraham Avinu wore. I don't know whether he wore a frack and a hamburger, or maybe he wore a Sephardish cloak. Or some people say that Avraham Avinu wore a shtreimel. I have no idea. But what's clear is that he wore a shoe and we knew exactly what that shoe looked like. And nothing's changed in this shoe in all the years. This shoe is described in the Gemara in minute detail. Rule number 1, Torah says, that's the lashon of the Torah. Naloi, she has to take off his nal. The Gemara learns from a pasuk that a nal in the Torah is only called a shoe if it's made entirely from leather. It's learned from a pasuk in Yechezkel, that an alcho tachash, a nal has to be made of leather. Every part of this shoe is made from leather. There's no natural fibers, and there's nothing which grows. Everything is leather. There's a sole, which is stronger leather, more rigid leather. There's the upper part, which is again leather. Shoelaces, which are leather. Stitching all the way around, all from leather. Every part of this shoe, the buttons and the buttonholes, everything is made of leather. Meir goes into great details about this shoe. The upper part of this shoe has to be black. There's no Chalitza shoe in the world where the upper part of the shoe is not black, and the laces have to be natural, in their natural, original leather, not dyed, but the upper part has to be dyed. The sole is actually optional. It's not discussed by the Rishonim, and there are actually different Chalitza shoes in this one prat, whether we do or don't dye the sole of the shoe. Now, the shoe has to be made from the sole and the upper part, and the upper part has to go up his leg as well. And it needs to be held in place tightly, because v'cholza means she's removing something which is held tightly in place. To that end, we have 3 buttons and buttonholes. Here we have the buttons on the left side, dafka on the left side of the shoe, and the buttonholes on the right side. But of course, the buttons and the buttonhole are all made of leather. There's no buttons like we have buttons today, but we fashion a button out of leather, and we fashion a buttonhole out of leather, and stitch them again with leather to the shoe. We'll soon see exactly how this is tied up on the Yavam. And then there are the shoelaces. We know today, thousands of years later, exactly how shoes were tied in years bygone. The Yerushalmi says a nusach, Iker Chalitza is the untying of the shoelaces. You need to take off every part of the shoe, but the most important part of Chalitza are the shoelaces. And the Rosh brings the Yerushalmi and he wonders and he says, doesn't understand. You tell me that a shoe needs to have buttons and it also needs to have shoelaces. I can understand that. But to tell me that the most important part of the shoe is the shoelace, says the Rosh, I don't understand. Where did the Yerushalmi get this from? Says the Meshech Chochmah, Dvarim Pshutim. Where does Chalitza come from? From Avraham Avinu. What did Avraham Avinu say? Im michut v'ad tzroich na'al. And because of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the mitzvah of Chalitza. So you see from there that the most important part of the Chalitza is the tzroich na'al, the shoelaces. In fact, the Beis Din makes a bracha on the mitzvah of Chalitza, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu b'mitzvosav v'chukav shel Avraham Avinu. Why? Because the mitzvah of Chalitza is called mitzvosav v'chukav shel Avraham Avinu. We got this mitzvah from Avraham Avinu in his zechus, the zechus of Avraham Avinu, that he said in Michut v'ad tzroich na'al. The need for Chalitza can be very, very difficult. In a situation where one needs a Chalitza, if the Yavam is living next door, well and good. Brother-in-law is next door and he's prepared to do Chalitza, everything is good and easy. Not always will he cooperate. Not always does the brother-in-law want to do Chalitza. Not always do we know where he lives. Not always do we even know whether he's alive. This has throughout history made Chalitza very, very difficult. For hundreds of years, there used to be an accepted norm in Klal Yisrael that lady got married, she's very happy to marry her husband. There's a worry that he might die without children, and his brother is anywhere around the world, and who knows whether he will or won't agree to do Chalitza. It was an accepted norm for hundreds of years that the chassan had to come to his chasna with a signed document from his brother that if this chassan is going to die, the brother is agreeable to do Chalitza. It was a security for an insurance policy for the wife. The greatest people in the world, Rabbi Kveiger brought this to his chasna, Chasam Sofer brought this to his chasna. This was an accepted thing in the world. Recently we had, Klal Yisrael went through the horrors of the Holocaust, and first and foremost that made terrible difficulties with agunas. Shiur tonight, in the dinim of Mayim she'esh lehem soif, Mayim she'ein lehem soif. And this is the question of the agunas from the Second World War. At which stage is it called a Mayim she'esh lehem soif, ein lehem soif? If I saw him being thrown into the gas chamber, if I have an aide who survived, that's probably yes enough. We don't need to be choishish that he got out of the gas chamber. But what happens if I didn't? I have an aide who says that he saw him arriving in Auschwitz. Is that enough to allow his wife to get married? If I didn't even see that, but I have an aide who knew was on the train to Auschwitz, etc., etc. These are the shilas discussed in the poskim immediately after the Second World War. On top of that, there were difficulties in situations where we verified 100% that her husband died. We had eidim that he died. We know he died, but he left behind no children, and he had a brother back in the Heim in Poland and Hungary. He had a brother. What's with his brother? I have no idea where his brother is. Did survive? Didn't survive? We don't know. What's the din? This is a major discussion in the poskim. If we've no idea whether the Yovam survived, are we as strict as we are with an Eishes Ish, that even Mayim she'ein lehem soif, and even Avad Zichroi, that we haven't seen him for 10 years, we still can't allow her to get married? Or perhaps in the dinim of Chalitza, we can be more lenient. It's good enough that we know that he was in Poland and he hasn't been seen of. Is that enough? These are a big discussion in the poskim after the Second World War. One of the things discussed by Arichas in the poskim after the war is an incredible tshuva of Rav Moshe. The Mishnah we've all learned in Yevamos speaks about Nofala, Abayis, Olav, Va'al Bona. The husband and his children were all killed at the same time. The Mishnah is talking about the Rufa. Now, if he died and a minute later his son died, so his wife is mutter, she doesn't need Yibum. If his son died first and a minute later the father died, then she needs Chalitza. She can't get married without it. And we've no idea. We know they both died, but we don't know in which order. Says the Mishnah, she still needs Chalitza, because you don't know. You don't know at the time when her husband died, was the son still alive or not? This was for many, many people the case in the Second World War. We know he died. We know his children died. The brother is either from or not from. It's this part of the world, the other part of the world. Agreeable or not agreeable to Chalitza. Does she need Chalitza? L'ch'oira, on the face of it, the story of Second World War is an exact replica of the Mishnah of Nofal Abayis Olav Va'al Bona, and she needs Chalitza. But Moshe has an incredible kula, and he says as follows. In the story of Nofal Abayis Olav Va'al Bona, the Eidim came to Beis Din and said, we testify that all these people were killed in the house. So we know, they all died. The question is only in which order. What happens, says Rav Moshe, if the Eidim came to Beis Din and they said, we saw her husband dead? That's it. So the Beis Din says, well, if we have Eidim that the husband died, then she's not an Eishes Ish, she's out to get married. 5 minutes later, the Eidim come to Beis Din and they say, we also saw her children, his children, also killed. Says Rav Moshe, if you only find out afterwards that the children died, when the Beis Din paskin that she's allowed to get married, she got a cheskes het, she's allowed to get married. Subsequently, you find out that the children died and maybe actually did die before him, but we don't know. Says Rav Moshe, a subsequent edus that the children died can't change the chazaka that she has, that she's allowed to get married. That's Rav Moshe's tshuva. And it took me years till I saw Rav Moshe's tshuva. There's a very interesting thing. I have here with me printed documents from, there was a Beis Din set up in Hungary immediately after the war in Mishkalt. Those Rabbonim who survived, for those Agunas who survived, tried to be matir as many Agunas as they could. The figure that is generally known is that Reb Shlomo David Kahana was matir 5,000 Agunas to get married in this Beis Din after the war. And he wrote about it himself, that not one, sadly, but all those Agunas who was matir never once did the husband turn up later? Which is a simon both of how right his psak was and how sad the Second World War was. Incidentally, that record is a record for Agunas, but is not a record for Yibum. They're printed in Sfarim, stories of a lady who got Rashus to get married from the Beis Din, and Rashus from the Beis Din that she doesn't need Chalitza because her brother-in-law was killed in the war. And lo and behold, she gets married, and 2 years later, her brother-in-law turns up. This is recorded fact, written chuvas about it. She obviously now needs Chalitza from her brother-in-law. The question is, can she stay with her new husband after that Chalitza? That's one of the unfortunate stories after the Second World War. Be that as it may, I have here the documents which are written, and the Beis Din asks the Eidim, those who survived, tell us about the people whom you saw, and can you testify? Did you see this man, that he was dead? Did you see him going into the gas chamber? Did you see him arriving in Auschwitz? Did you see him sent left or right? Did you see him on the train? And they went through name after name after name, each person who survived, establishing as much information as we know, and then the Beis Din would decide, according to the information, whether she's allowed to get married. And it troubled me for a long time. I got these papers from the Rabbonim after the war. They set up a Beis Din. They found somehow a printing press, and they printed this whole long questionnaire of questions, 2 pages of questions. And nowhere on their questions do they ask, do you know, did you see his children alive or dead? Not one question. What you see is a whole document. And after all that, the Beis Din paskins, handwritten, that she's allowed to get married. And then there's another page afterwards, it says, and she's allowed to get married without Chalitza. It's a double pillow. If you're asking all these questions, why don't you ask questions? Can you establish for us information about his children? At Shalom Adati, Rav Moshe's Tshuva, I understood the goinus of these Rabbonim after the war. They wanted first to establish that she's not an Eshes Ish, her husband has died, and only afterwards, first we'll establish she's allowed to get married, and worst comes to the worst, we'll find out afterwards that her children were killed, at least she's allowed to get married. Be that as it may, let us now try and focus on the intricacies of the actual Maisa Chalitza that happens in Beis Din. No Chalitza ever happens in the world that they just turn up one fine day in Beis Din to do Chalitza. There always has to be a number of discussions in the Beis Din before. The Beis Din will call the Yovam and the Yevama, the brother and the sister-in-law, and they have a lot of questions that they need to establish. The most important thing that the Beis Din wants to know is, this Yovam, the brother-in-law, is he right-footed or left-footed? This is a very important question, very well known, that the Beis Din will stand the Yovam there and tell him, now go and walk to the wall. And they want to see, does he start moving with his right leg or with his left leg? What's the reason for all this? Let's start from the Gemara. The Pasuk says, V'chol tzom na'aloi me'al ragloi. She should remove his shoe from his foot. There's no mention in the Torah which shoe from which foot. But the Gemara learns, adin de'raisa, that it has to be right foot. How do we know? It says in the Torah the word ragloi twice, and there's a gzeira shov. It says once ragloi by Chalitza, and another time ragloi by a Metzora. The Metzora comes to the Beis Hamikdash, he wants to become Torah, he brings a korban asham, and then the Pasuk says, V'nosam, then you put midama asham, al tunuch oizen amitar hayamonis, on his right ear, v'al boyin ragloi hayamonis, and on the thumb, on the toe of his right leg. Says the Gemara, the same way that the Metzora has to be his right leg, ragloi hayamonis, explicit in the Pasuk, so too by Chalitza it has to be the right leg. So that's a clear-cut thing in the Gemara. If he's right-footed, you have to do Chalitza on the right leg. You do it on the left leg, it's no good. That's Poshet. Now, what happens if his left-legged is not written in the Gemara? Nothing in the Gemara. Gemara says you got to use the right leg. This is a matter of discussion in the Rishonim. The greatest, the Ramban, the Rashba, Gedolei Rishonim discussed this shaila. We're familiar with the dinim of left-handed people, lefties, for tefillin and tizidayim and lulav. Left-legged people is a major discussion in the Rishon. The Rashba says that the Gzeres HaKosov of Ragla Emonis, it makes no difference who you are. Your right leg, left leg, it makes no difference. Chalitza is always on the right leg. It brings a very geschmack araya, says the Rashba. Where do we learn the right leg from? From the Metzora. What does it say by the Metzora? Al tenuch oizen amitara emonis, val boyin ragla emonis. Says the Rashba, the right ear will always be the right ear. There's no such a thing as a person who's right-eared or left-eared. Everybody hears the same in both ears. So when the Torah says oizen hayemonis, it always means it's an absolute din. It's always the right. So ragla hayemonis by the Metzora is always going to be the right leg. And if it's always the right leg by the Metzora, it'll always be the right leg by the Chalitza. That's the Rashba's opinion. The Ramban and other Gedolei Rishonim argue. They say the Torah which says right leg is for right-legged people, left-legged people, Chalitza on the left leg. So what would we say? If we're not sure if this guy is right or left, or if we know that he's left-legged, what should we do? Do Chalitza on both shoes. The right leg with the right foot, with the right shoe, and the left leg with a left shoe. Even this is not so simple. Because the Rishonim learn in Shittas Rashi and Bechoros and Meir and Beis that a left-legged man cannot do Chalitza at all on either leg. Because the Torah insists on the right leg, and the right leg only means a right leg if you use the right leg as your major leg. And if he's left-legged, he cannot do Chalitza at all. Because of all this, we're very, very wary. It's a big problem if the Yavam is left-legged. We'll always look for a brother who's right-legged. Sometimes you have a Yavam there's only one brother-in-law, and he is left-legged, and we have no choice. And we have to do Chalitza with a right shoe and a left shoe. This is very, very rare. I spoke today to a Shoavei Mayim in Lakewood, and he was telling me on the phone that they had one case of a Yavam who was left-legged and they needed a left shoe. And in the entire East Coast, they couldn't find a Chalitza shoe for the left leg, and they had to get a shoe flown in from California. There was a story many, many years ago after the war. It's well known. Hagoyin Ramotra Pogromansky, Zechron Levracha, Grace Ilui from Telz, and he was nifta in France in the 50s. And didn't have any children, and his wife needed a Chalitza in America. And again, they arranged a time. The brother didn't really want to do Chalitza, he didn't keep much, and arranged a time. When he finally came to do the Chalitza, and he's left-legged. And now go look, there was an 8-day delay till they found a shoe for the left leg. Very, very complicated if it's left leg. So the first thing the basin wants to establish is that this Yavam is right-legged. Number one. Next thing we want to establish is the almona, the sister-in-law, the wife of the dead man, that she's a righty with her hands. She's going to do the chalitza. 99% of the chalitza has to be done with her right hand. In this case, it's quite clear in the Rishonim, if she's a righty, it's a right hand. If she's a lefty, it's a left hand. But the basin will want to establish that she's right-handed. Okay. Once we have established this information, the basin also wants to know about the ages, particularly her age, which is also relevant to halacha. Now we have everybody's agreement, and we're ready to do chalitza. Now, the pasuk says, "Va'alsa yevimtoi hashara." She should come to hashara, to the Beis Din, with a hair yediyah. From here we learn, says the Gemara, that it has to be established earlier that the Beis Din is going to be here. That means the day before the chalitza, the Beis Din will come to wherever the place is, this room, this shul, whatever it might be, sit down and say, we're kivei amokim, that tomorrow we're going to do chalitza here. You can't change the venue of a chalitza suddenly at the last minute, do it somewhere else. No, but also vimta hashara, dafka to the place which was decided upon the day before. Interesting is that the mitzvah of chalitza, according to the poskim, is a mitzvah on the brother-in-law. He's the one who has the mitzvah. The wife, very debatable whether she has a mitzvah or it's just an opportunity for her to be able to get married an opportunity for her to do a tova for the neshama of her husband. But the actual mitzvah, the kiyum mitzvah of the Torah, is definitely a mitzvah on the brother. Interesting thing is, the Gemara learns from a pasuk. I would have thought, if it's his mitzvah, let him go running to the town, to the beis din of wherever she is. It's his mitzvah to do. The Gemara in Sanhedrin learns from a pasuk. No, the pasuk says El Ziknei Iroi, of his town. Mikan, says the Gemara, she has to schlep to his town, even though it's his mitzvah, but he has the right, and it might be even more than a right, that the Chalitza should be dafka in his town where he lives. So the basin in his town will be Kaveh Mokim, that we're going to make a Chalitza in this particular place tomorrow. And
why are you going tomorrow?
This Chalitza, generally we know a basin for Dinim Momnus. All Batidinim today is a basin only of 3. We don't have more than 3 today. We don't have Dinim Nefashis today. The only time you have more than 3 is a Chalitza. A Chalitza needs not 3 dayonim, but 5 dayonim. And on top of the 5 dayonim, says Shulchan Aruch, there's a mitzvah of presumim, a mitzvah to publicize the Chalitza, to make sure that there's a tzibur there, a minimum of 10 people. The mice is, whenever there's a Chalitza, there's many, many more. There's an Indian to bring more people, but the minimum is 10 people. Okay.
Ellie, I'm going
So, on the day,
I said I'm going. I don't know why you're thinking.
Brother of the nifta comes to the beis din.
Come on.
Sister-in-law comes to the beis din.
To get ready.
And first comes a statement. She needs to make a statement, and the statement has to be said in the Lashon of the Torah, and it has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. And she quotes the words written in the Torah, Me'ein Yomi lahakim la'achiv shem. My brother-in-law refuses to marry me.
That's the only person.
In today's world, even if he would want to, we wouldn't let him marry her. We don't let him do Yibum. Because Yibum is really marrying a sister-in-law, which is Chayv Krisis, but it's allowed if it's done entirely L'Shem Mitzvah. We're not so sure. People are suspect today. They're not doing L'Shem Mitzvah, and therefore we don't let them do Chalitza. Don't let them do Yibum today, only Chalitza. The Rashba says that even if the reason why he doesn't do Yibum is because we don't let him, the Beis Din doesn't let him, that's still called Me'ein Yevami, Lo Ova Yabami. I don't want to marry her for whatever the reason he doesn't want to do Yibum, and therefore we're going to do Chalitza. So Chalitza has to be done with the shoe on the foot of the brother, directly on the foot. There's no sock, obviously. Not only no sock, but the beis din will wash his foot, and after washing his foot, we'll check it carefully for any chatzitzas. This is a din chatzitza deraisa. We've got to make sure there's no chatzitza on his leg. Once that's done, the beis din will now dress the shoe on his foot. For demonstration purposes, we'll try and show this a little bit, what it looks like dressing up the foot of the Yavam. We put his foot in over here, and we close the buttons. The buttons were closed from the bottom. Start with the bottom one, tight one is the middle one, and then the third one. And then comes what the Yerushalmi says, the ikar of Chalitza is the sroichna. Now, you'll notice at the back of the shoe, 2 what's called in halacha windows. There's 2 windows over here, cut into the leather. The reason for these windows is because the shoelaces have to go around his foot and have to actually touch his foot at the back. The big tshuva in the Noda B'Yehuda, how every detail of the Chalitza shoe is exactly the way it's written in the Gemara. 2 windows, not more and not less. If you have only 1 window, says the Noda B'Yehuda, it's not going to be tight on his foot. And if it's not tight, then you don't really have a cholzan aloy. Cholzan means she's removing something which is tight. What would I say? So I'm going to make it really tight. Cut a 3rd hole. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, if you have 3 holes, then you've lost the whole tzura, the picture, the form of the shoe. Doesn't retain its status of being a shoe if it has 3 holes in it. So there's 2 holes and 2 holes exactly. Now, the position where the laces are connected to the shoe are exactly written in Shulchan Aruch. They are to be stitched to the side, not closer to the toes and not higher up, exactly over here. And again, of course, the stitching has to be from leather. Now the Beis Din will start tying it around his feet. So we take one lace and go around the back, make sure it touches his foot, and the other lace, and it goes round the back. We bring them round to the front, and they cross between button 1 and button 2. Then bring them round again. The next hole, the next window at the back, make sure both of them are touching his foot, and cross again between number 2 and number 3 of the buttons, and then cross again at the back over here on his foot, and finally bring the 2 shoelaces to the front and tie them. It's very easy to tie and not so easy to untie. The Beis Din will tie one knot and a second one on top of that, and for good measure, a bow on the top. This is the right foot of the Yavam, ready for Chalitza. Nothing halachic has happened yet. For Chaltza, the mitzvah of Chalitza is she has to remove the shoe. The Gemara learns from the V'chaltza that she has to be the one to remove the shoe from beginning to end without the man's involvement at all. He is to be entirely passive. A very interesting thing. He has the mitzvah of Chalitza and he doesn't lift a finger. He doesn't do a thing. He's not allowed to do a thing. So much so that the Pasuk say the Beis Din makes the bracha, but not the Yavam. He has the mitzvah. But it's for him, it's a mitzvah she'ein bo ma'aseh. Doesn't do a thing. And the Beis Din warns him, you're not to be involved, you're not to help in any way at all. Gemara learns from the Pasuk v'choltza na'aleh me'al ragloit that his foot has to be stump on the ground. He can't lift up his foot on a chair, on a table, which will make it much easier for her. The foot has to be dochus lakarka, connected to the floor. If there'll be time, a little bit to understand the way Zohar explains why, but that's the din. It has to be touching the floor. On the other hand, the Yevama would be easiest if his foot is on the floor. Let her sit on the floor, on a chair, and untie. But no, Chalitza she has to do standing. Standing precludes she can't sit, nor can she bend her knees and crouch, which is the way we teach girls to bend. No, she has to bend over in front of him. He's standing there, and she has to bend down in front of him all the way down to the ground, and then untie the shoe. She's warned very strictly to use her right hand and only her right hand. No help from the left hand in the first part of the Chalitza. So she's bending over in an uncomfortable position. His foot is on the floor, and with her right hand only, she has to gingerly untie the shoe. Untie the bow, and then untie the double knot, which obviously takes time. Not that easy for me either, but I'm going to make it easier, even though it's not the way it's done. With her right hand, she will untie the knot and unravel one lace, and then unravel it at the front, all the way down till the bottom, till she's removed the stroichnal entirely. This is part of the Chalitza, but not the entire Chalitza. When she's removed
You weigh like 12 pounds.
the laces entirely, now comes the buttons, and she will do the buttons from the bottom. Untie the button 1, button 2, and button 3. Now comes the most difficult part of the Chalitza. He's still standing here with his foot on the floor. Her mitzvah of Chalitza, v'choltza na'aleh, is from beginning to end, from the bow at the top, till she's removed
Oh, it's locked.
the shoe. She has to actually
No,
remove
no,
the
that's
shoe
when you turn
from his
it
foot.
over.
But
Then
you
you
cannot
start-
remove the shoe as long as his foot is on the floor. But he's not allowed to do any part of the chalitza. So what needs to happen? He will stand against a wall or a plank of
Oh, we
wood
want to watch this.
and support himself on his left leg.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
Oh, why?
And this is the only time that we let her use her
Right
left
now?
hand.
Yeah.
With her left hand, she has to lift up his foot so that she's able to take the shoe off. Now, it would be very easy after she lifts up the foot with the left leg. If you're not careful, what happens? The shoe falls off. The shoe falls off, you have real tzolus.
Hmm?
Why? Did she do this, taking off the shoe? No. So we haven't done a chalitza.
What time did this start?
But, says the
8:30.
Gemara,
Oh,
this is
Oh,
enough
that's-
of a chalitza that from this point on, they wouldn't be allowed to do Yibum anymore. So what? We're not going to do Yibum anyway. So we're going to do chalitza anyway. But the din is as follows. A man died, he left behind 8 brothers. You don't need chalitza from 8 brothers. One of the 8 brothers, ideally the oldest, otherwise the second or the third or the fourth, will do chalitza. And that one does chalitza, and that's all she needs. But chalitza of one brother only works as long as he would be allowed to do yibum. If you're doing a chalitza and by mistake the shoe falls off, that's called in halacha chalitza psula, and we're not allowed to do yibum anymore. And if we're not allowed to do yibum anymore, you need chalitza now from all the 8 brothers, wherever they might be around the world. You can imagine the pressure that there is in the Beis Din right now. Make sure this gets done correctly. There's a few other situations of chalitza
They
psula
have LA
which
Fitness in
have
Canada?
the same effect, that you're going to need chalitza from all the brothers, which makes it so difficult. So she's to lift up his foot with her left leg, with her left hand, and then with her right hand, she's to pull off the shoe. And then she throws it onto the floor. In many places, this comes from the Zoya, after she throws it on the floor, she picks it up again and throws it further afield. That's the Maisa of the Chalitza. This is then followed by the continuation in the Pasuk, V'yorka b'fanov. She's instructed to collect saliva in her mouth. In front of her brother-in-law and in front of all 5 dayanim, she is to spit. It sounds simple, not so simple, because you need all 5 dayanim, have to be able to see the spit coming all the way from the mouth, all the way until it hits the floor. Bear in mind that dayanim, to be called a Beis Din, have to be sitting. So they've got to be sitting, got to have all 5 of them sitting, and no one in the way, that all 5 of them should be able to see the spit from her mouth all the way to the floor. When this is done, the pasuk continues with a further few words that she needs to say. The pasuk can discuss, he's just spent the last 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes touching a shoe, touching his foot. Generally, we wouldn't be allowed to make a bracha. We have a ruach ra on our hands, lekiyos. We need to wash our hands after touching shoes and feet. But his foot, don't forget, has just been washed. The shoe is a mitzvah in the Torah to do the mitzvah of chalitza. The bottom line is that it's accepted in the poskim. There's no need to wash hands, not for her, and the Maram Shik adds, not even for the Beis Din who were busy tying up the shoe. When all this is over, she will make an announcement which is mandated by the Torah. Kocha ye'oseh lo ish asher lo yivne es beis ochiv. And then she makes an announcement to everybody who's standing around. V'nikra shemoi b'Yisrael. We are to announce about him, and she will repeat 3 times. Beis chalutz hanoal, beis chalutz hanoal, beis chalutz hanoal. At this point, the dayanim and everybody else who's around will copy her and say 3 times, chalutz hanoal, chalutz hanoal, chalutz hanoal. And when we finish the last chalutz hanoal, then she's allowed to get married, and the husband's neshama goes to its correct place in Gan Eden. At this point, the Beis Din will make a impassionate plea, which is written in Shulchan Aruch, Yiratzim Ufanach Midavan HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shlita Vayeno B'nai Yisrael, that no Yiddish girls should ever have to come. Loyli de Yibum, V'loyli de Chalitza. There should be no need in Klal Yisrael for Yibum or for Chalitza. We don't have the opportunity to go into the depths of what this signifies, why it's so important to do a Chalitza, why every button and every part of the shoelace is exact and pedantic, and there's a cheshbon, a pikabola in every little point, but we haven't got time for that now. May we be zoicha be'emes, shloite ve'eno b'nei Yisrael, loyli de yibum, v'loyli de chalitza, and should be in ganz Klal Yisrael only simchas.
That's it.
I do need to watch that.
Oh, man, what's up with your hair? Is there another one?
I think so.